Welcome back. Pete Early is one of America's most known mental health advocates and is a Pulitzer Prize nominated author of Crazy, a father's search through America's mental health madness. This morning he sits down with National Edition producer Candace Madsen and discusses why our current mental health system is deeply flawed.
You are a well-respected journalist, worked for the Washington Post, you've written bestsellers for the New York Times. But it wasn't until you faced a personal family crisis that you actually were on the inside of the mental illness battle. What was that like for you as a father?
It was absolutely horrifying. All of a sudden, that person who was standing in front of me, who looked like my son, who I knew was my son, was a complete stranger. Not only a complete stranger, but a very scary stranger, and a person who was having wild thoughts, and a person who was crying at one minute, laughing at this next, a person who had no understanding of what he was going through. And you couldn't reason with him. And of course, my first reaction as a parent was, knock it off, stop it, just quit this, do what I tell you, and that didn't work.
How old was he?
He was in college, and most mental illnesses surface, especially in young men in their early 20s. And you know, there were no warning signs. Now my son, Kevin, was very artistic, and he always walked to the beat of a different drummer, but one day he called me up and he said, I think I took some homeless people to breakfast. And I thought, well, it's my money. I'm paying for him to go to college, so what's it, you know, that's. And then he called me and said, I think I dreamt that. I can't tell reality from that. And I rushed him to a doctor, and I'll never forget, the doctor said to me, if you're lucky, he's using drugs. If you're not lucky, he has a mental illness. And I thought, man, this guy's a quack. I mean, who tells a parent that? And my son took pills for a while, and they seemed to help, and I was so stupid. I thought, oh, it's like aspirin. You get a headache, you take aspirin, it goes away. And he stopped taking his medication. A year later, he became full-blown psychotic. He was wandering the streets of Manhattan, hadn't slept in 5 days, convinced God had him on a special mission. And that's when our story really began, and I began to see just how little I knew about mental illness.
And you have resources, you're educated, and you still had a tough time finding help for your son.
I can even top that. After I wrote my book, you want a happy ending in your book, but after I wrote my book, my son had another mental breakdown. Now, I'd written a book. I'm not wealthy, but I live in the wealthiest county in the United States, thanks to tax dollars, because it's right outside of Washington, D.C., everybody works for the government. I had connections at the Washington Post, New York Times. I knew I'd spent a year researching this. And you know what? My son became psychotic. I couldn't get him help. He ended up getting tasered by the police and carted away. Now, with all that, if I couldn't get him help, what chance does somebody who has no knowledge of mental health, no money, no education, no connections? I mean, that's how difficult it is to get into our system to get help.
And then you investigated your son's case.
I did.
What have you learned that is cause for concern, but also makes you more hopeful?
Well, the biggest cause of concern is my son, I tried to get him help. I was turned away from an emergency room because he was not considered a danger to himself or others. 48 hours later, he broke into a stranger's house. Luckily, they weren't there. He broke in to take a bubble bath, and he got arrested. He was charged with 2 felonies. And I discovered that right now, as we're speaking, there are 365,000 people with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia and major depression in jails and prisons. More than 1 million are on probation. The largest public mental facility in the United States today is not a hospital, it's the Los Angeles County Jail. So I entered this world where my son was not an aberration. He was part of what has happened to people with mental illness. We have closed all the state hospitals. We don't have anywhere for them to go, so they're either homeless in substandard assisted living facilities, or they're in jails and prisons. And 16% of people in jails and prisons today are people who are sick. These are people who used to be in state hospitals, but we don't have any community-based treatment for them, so they're in there. They stay 3 times longer than everybody else. They have an 85% recidivism rate, and we know if you put somebody with a mental illness in a prison, it actually makes their conditions much, much worse. Oftentimes they end up in solitary confinement, not for days, not for weeks, but for months and years. It's a horrific sentence for somebody who is sick and deserves our help, not punishment.
So what's the solution?
Well, there's reason to have hope because people are beginning to see that recovery is possible. If you provide mental health services, wraparound services, somebody like my son, there's an 85% recovery rate. 85% recovery rate. It's interesting because if you look at the other side of that coin, if you don't and they're in prison, there's an 85% return rate, recidivism rate. What's interesting is it costs about the same to incarcerate as it does to help somebody. And if you help someone, they get better, they no longer cost as much, they move on with their lives. So it's not only the right thing to do, it is financially the thing to do. But I have discovered you can't predict human behavior in the sense of you don't know who's going to get. I was in LA, a guy homeless for 25 years. You'd say, wow, this guy doesn't have a chance, alcoholic, blah, blah, blah. They gave him a place to live where he was safe. They gave him a team of specialists who came in to help him. That guy has his own apartment, he works at a little job in his life, he's clean, he's sober, and he's moving on. Who would have dreamt that that person after 25 years on the street could be saved?
What's your message to the parent out there that has a child or an adult child that feels totally overwhelmed? What is your message to them?
Well, first of all, you have to take care of yourself. And I would suggest you join NAMI. It has a fabulous program called Family to Family that will help you kind of draw the line on. The hardest thing as a parent, hardest thing, is accepting the things you cannot change. It's the prayer, you know, where you say, give me that power to accept. You can't control another person's life. And that's very difficult when you're the parent because your job is to save your child. And you have to learn that you can't save your child, but you can become their partner and try to help them save themselves. But the first step is to reach out for help for yourself. And then NAMI parents are phenomenal. Most of us have been through a lot of things that somebody else is just getting into, and you can give advice, practical advice. You can't contact a judge if your kid gets arrested, but guess what? You can send them a fax. You know, that kind of thing.
But there's hope?
There's always hope. And my son's a perfect example of that. You know, there was a time when he was so sick as a parent, I thought it'd been better if he'd never been born. And that's a horrible, horrible thing for a parent to say. And now he's doing fantastic. He is what's called a peer-to-peer specialist. He's a person who has a mental illness, who helps people with mental illness, like Alcoholics Anonymous has some. Give you an example, a guy over 300 pounds living in the basement of his parents' house, hadn't been out for 4 years. My son went over, started visiting him, talking to him, got him out, took him to McDonald's, went to a movie together. Now that doesn't mean much unless it's your kid. And that's the power of hope.
Peter Early with Candace Madsen. All kinds of pictures, advertisements, and articles pop up on those Facebook news feeds, and some families find the content inappropriate. Next, we look into the issue to see how Facebook reviews and determines if posts should be removed.